Investigations are ongoing at Wang Fuk Court, while each affected household gets $50,000 more as living allowance. The ICAC arrests 4 more persons for allegedly inciting others not to vote or to cast invalid votes in Legco elections. And President Xi Jinping meets with French leader Emmanuel Macron in Beijing, calling for stronger partnership. Good evening, you're watching Cable News. I'm Evan Bai. All 7 residential blocks at Wang Fuk Court in Taipo are still under lockdown, as investigators at the scene used drones to collect evidence. The government announced the support fund for the tragedy now totals around $2.8 million, and the living subsidy for each affected household will be doubled to $100,000. Meanwhile, the Seoul building spared in the deadly fire saw more residents make brief returns for the second day. Arriving by free shuttle bus or individually, residents of Wang Chi House carried luggage and large bags back to the block, which they had not seen for 9 days. Government personnel were at the site to assist residents in returning to their flats and carrying heavy items. This is my first time back since the inferno. I returned to get my passport since the fire did not burn it, said this woman. While this woman said the water and electricity in her flat were intact and fully functional, the building's lifts were also still operational. After visiting displaced households at the Youth Post Hostel in Kai Tak, Secretary for Home and Youth Affairs Alex Mack announced that the living allowance will be increased from $50,000 to $100,000 per household. Edward Toh, Director of Social Welfare, stated that more than 1,600 affected households have registered for the one social worker per household support service. Each social worker provides residents with a mobile number so they can be contacted at any time. We also call them around twice a day to check how they are and ask what they might need, Toh added. In addition to social worker support, 2 to 3 civil servants will be assigned to each household, providing support. Efforts are ongoing through various channels to identify those who have not yet reached out. Across Hong Kong, workers are racing to remove protective netting from hundreds of buildings following the deadly Taipo fire, as the government demands the removal to be done by Saturday, amid a growing scandal over the alleged use of fraudulent fire safety certificates that affects construction safety. Kunting Yang has more details.
At Feng Hua Estate in Chai Wan, workers were seen urgently dismantling the meshing nets from buildings under maintenance this morning. Authorities acted after reports that its flame-retardant certificates were fraudulent. While the housing department took samples for testing last week, anxious residents await results and demand swift removal of all netting to eliminate fire risks. Similar dismantling is underway at Fortress Garden in North Point, following same reports of fraudulent certificates. Meanwhile, residents of Marigold Mansions in Hong Kong also reported forged documents, with police investigating. The safety scandal widened and prompted the government to order all scaffolding netting in buildings undergoing major repairs to be removed within 3 days. While the ultimatum affects over 200 private buildings and about a dozen public housing projects, industry representatives say they have enough manpower to meet the deadline, but warn of project delays. Chelsea Kidd, chairman of the Hong Kong Construction Industry Employees General Union, said on radio that before new netting is installed, samples must pass new tests, potentially halting work for about 10 days per site. Meanwhile, Lawrence Ng, permanent honorary president of the Hong Kong Construction Subcontractors Association, held out the possibility that the suppliers and contractors might be innocent, suggesting the government to require manufacturers verifying each batch of netting to shorten official testing. Kunting Yang, Cable News.
The removal of potentially flammable construction netting at a housing estate in Tuen Mun has been delayed, marked by a protest over unpaid wages. At Elegance Gardens, scaffolding netting still covers 3 residential blocks. The work was halted after contractors for the estate's major renovations, the same as Wang Fuk Court, suspended operations after the deadly fire in the Taipo estate. The delay is linked to a payment dispute with workers who hung a banner at the estate's gate reading, "We sweat but get no pay." Residents said the owners' corporation held an emergency meeting last night to address the crisis and plans to hire a new contractor to remove the netting. Many, however, criticized the government's Saturday deadline as unrealistic, arguing the order is too rushed and there isn't enough time. Marking the Constitution Day, the city leader vowed to transform the community's grief over the Taipo fire into concrete public safety actions, framing the government's response as an embodiment of constitutional principles. Meanwhile, senior Beijing representative Liu Guangyuan endorsed the SAR government's handling of the fire and supported holding Legislative Council elections as scheduled. Quentin Yang reports.
The seminar, jointly held by the SAR government and Beijing's liaison office in Hong Kong, began with a minute of silence for the victims of the Taipo Wang Fuk Court blaze. In his address, Chief Executive Zhang Li said the tragedy reinforced his belief in the Constitution and the rule of law, emphasizing that their spirit lies in tangibly protecting welfare and ensuring a secure life for all citizens. He committed to turning the lessons from the tragedy into concrete measures, noting that a judge-led independent committee would request all government departments with investigative powers to assist finding the truth. For his part, Liaison Office Deputy Director Liu Guangyuan commended the SAR government's forceful and effective response and highlighted the rapid mobilization of support from the government, civil society, and the mainland. However, he sharply criticized what he called attempts to exploit the tragedy, condemning anti-China Hong Kong destabilizing elements for fabricating lies, distorting facts, and inciting confrontation. Such acts, he said, will be severely condemned by social justice and resolutely punished by law. Liu also expressed confidence in the government's ability to manage both relief work and the legislative election this Sunday successfully. Quentin Yang, Cable News.
4 men have been arrested by the Independent Commission Against Corruption on suspicion of inciting others not to vote or to cast invalid votes in Sunday's Legislative Council elections. The 4 suspects, aged 37 to 62, were detained for allegedly reposting online messages or leaving comments on social media platforms that urged people to boycott the December 7th election or to cast blank or spoiled ballots. The ICAC had earlier charged 3 other individuals with the same offense. The commission said it would take firm action to ensure the election is conducted safely, fairly, openly, and honestly. President Xi Jinping said he held friendly, candid, and fruitful talks with visiting French President Emmanuel Macron in Beijing and called for stronger partnership for new era, following with signings of cooperation agreements. The pair will hold further talks in Chengdu tomorrow. Cheryl Yuan reports.
Macron and his wife Brigitte were given a grand welcome from Xi and First Lady Peng Liyuan at the Great Hall of the People. The 2 leaders inspected the Guard of Honor before engaging in discussions of various topics, including economic and trade and the Russia-Ukraine war. Xi said China is willing to work with France and always proceed from the fundamental interest of the people of the 2 countries and the long-term interest of the international community, eliminating any interferences and following the principles of dialogue on an equal footing and open cooperation. The European leader said dialogue between China and France is vital, renewing his call for Xi to back Europe's stance on Ukraine and urging Beijing to boost investment in France. On the Ukraine crisis, Xi said China will continue to play a constructive role and firmly opposes any irresponsible or discriminatory accusations. The meeting resulted in the signing of 12 cooperation agreements spanning nuclear energy, agriculture, aviation, and other key sectors. The pair later attended the closing ceremony of the 7th meeting of the China-France Business Council. This marked Macron's 4th state visit to China and a reciprocal trip to Xi's state visit to France last year. Macron will travel to Chengdu on Friday, where he is set to hold further talks with Xi. Cheryl Yun, Cable News.
A peace deal for Ukraine remains elusive after U.S. and Russian negotiators failed to reach a compromise in talks that U.S. President Donald Trump described as reasonably good. Cheryl Yun has more details.
Following talks with U.S. envoys, Russian President Vladimir Putin said the 5-hour encounter was necessary and useful, but also difficult work, with some of the proposals unacceptable to the Kremlin. The remarks were made during an interview with Indian press ahead of his visit to New Delhi.
I'm so pleased to see you.
Without a breakthrough with Moscow, Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and son-in-law Jared Kushner are set to meet with Ukraine's lead negotiator Rustem Umerov on Thursday in Miami for further talks. Speaking to reporters, Trump said the next steps for the peace talks remain unclear, though the team came away believing Putin genuinely wants to end the war.
He would like to see the war ended. I think he'd like to get back to dealing a more normal life. I think I'd like to be trading with the United States of America, frankly, instead of, losing thousands of soldiers a week. But their impression was very strongly that they'd like to make a deal.
The Kremlin pushed back on suggestions that Putin had rejected U.S. proposals, insisting no compromises have been found yet and describing the process as normal diplomatic work. Cheryl Yun, Cable News.
Rescue teams are racing to reach communities isolated by last week's catastrophic floods and landslides in Indonesia, Sri Lanka, and Thailand, as over 900 people remained missing. In Indonesia, the worst-hit country, rescuers found the bodies of 2 women under the pile of scattered timber in North Sumatra. As large piles of neatly cut timber were found among the debris, there was concern that deforestation may have contributed to the disaster. The government said it will review its environmental management. The death toll from last week's torrential rains in Indonesia, Sri Lanka, and Thailand has climbed past 1,400. Over half of them were from Indonesia. Many villages remained buried under mud and debris, with power and telecommunications out. Now let's take a look at the stock market. The Hang Seng Index ended the day up 175 points. Top active stocks of the day. Tencent was up $1, Alibaba was up 80 cents. Meituan was up $2.20. SMIC was up $2.60. Foreign exchange against the Hong Kong dollar. Canadian dollar 5.57, Australian dollar 5.14. On to the weather now. Slightly cooler with cloudy periods tonight and tomorrow morning. The minimum temperature will be about 18 degrees in the urban areas and a couple of degrees lower in the new territories. Mainly fine and dry during the day with the maximum temperature of around 23 degrees. Now let's take a look at the weather around the world. That's our news tonight. I'm Ethan Bai. Thanks for watching and good night.